But now moving on, let's delve even deeper into the mechanics of hypertrophy and talk about how exactly it works and, more importantly, how to cause it. A systematic review was done of 30 different studies on hypertrophy called Maximizing Muscle Hypertrophy, a systematic review of advanced resistance training techniques and methods. And this is done by, I think I got this name right, Mikhail Krzysztof et al. With the Institute of Sports Sciences, published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. This study has shown us exactly how hypertrophy works and different ways to maximize it. The very first thing that it states in the abstract is, and I quote, "Effective hypertrophy-oriented resistance training should comprise a combination of mechanical tension and metabolic stress," unquote. So, how do we best cause both of those, and how do we maximize them? Well, the results of the review state, and I quote, "Concerning the time efficiency of training, the use of agonist-antagonist sets, or otherwise known as alternating sets, upper-lower supersets, drop and cluster sets, or otherwise known as rest-pause sets, sarcoplasma stimulating training, employment of fast but controlled duration of eccentric contractions, and high load resistance training supplemented with low load resistance training under blood flow restriction may provide an additional stimulus and an advantage to traditional training protocol." So these are all great tactics to employ in your resistance training if you really want to maximize it. And I know because these are all tactics that I personally employ and endorse the use of, because I personally experienced a lot of hypertrophy with all of these. But the key with these tactics is not to try to use all of them at the same time, okay? They need to be periodized. Now, when it comes to causing mechanical tension specifically, the study states that, quote, "Mechanically induced tension produced both by force generation and muscle stretch is considered essential to muscle growth, and the combination of these stimuli appears to have a pronounced additive effect," end quote. So it is important to not just lift weights, but do so with a maximum range of motion and get a full stretch under tension, and also additionally to have a stretching routine as well after every training session. So between proper loading and stretching, that is how you are going to optimize your mechanical tension. Now the review actually had even more to say about the topic of metabolic stress, and to highlight a few of the most important things, quote, "Numerous studies support an anabolic role of exercise-induced metabolic stress, and some have speculated that metabolite accumulation may be more important than high force development in optimizing the hypertrophic response to training." So isn't that interesting? Because there's always been people out there who have talked about how in order to cause the most hypertrophy, you need to be using maximum loads and getting high force production, and that myofibrillar hypertrophy is more significant than sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, when in actuality, this systematic review of 30 important studies on hypertrophy found that metabolite accumulation may actually be even more important than high force development. And metabolite accumulation occurs from getting a metabolic workout. So this is proof of what I'm saying, that you can get equally muscular from light loads and getting a metabolic workout. And the study even goes on to further state that, quote, "This can be noted empirically by examining the moderate intensity training regimes adopted by many bodybuilders, which are intended to heighten metabolic stress while maintaining significant muscle tension," end quote. And that's of course something that I've seen as well, and why I'm such a big proponent of lighter, higher rep, technique-oriented training, because I've learned from a lot of great bodybuilders who have done the same thing, like Dorian Yates, for instance. So how exactly does metabolic stress work? Well, the study says that, quote, "Metabolic stress causes a buildup of metabolites such as lactate, hydrogen ion, inorganic phosphate, creatine, and others," end quote. And these metabolites are so significant because they are anabolic. Another thing it said was that, quote, "It has been hypothesized that a greater acidic environment promoted by metabolic training may lead to increased fiber degradation and greater stimulation of sympathetic nerve activity, thereby mediating an increased adaptive hypertrophic response." So even metabolic stress can cause actual myofibrillar muscle damage by increasing the acidity of the muscular environment. So don't think lightly of light training. Those high reps are actually counting for a lot, all right, because you're doing a very high volume of work when you are doing high rep training, all right, and the higher the volume, the more hypertrophy you are causing. But something that you need to consider when you are doing a higher volume is that increasing the time efficiency of your workout is very important, because you don't want it to take forever, but also increasing the time efficiency of your workout increases metabolic stress. Okay, so the more moving you are doing and the less resting between reps and sets you are doing, the more effective your workout is in causing metabolic stress. And you can maximize it by doing the types of sets that minimize rest times between sets, such as alternating sets and cluster sets, or rest pause sets as I call them, as well as supersets and drop sets. Now, the review also stated that, quote, evidence suggests that significant muscle growth occurs when the majority of training sets are performed with 3 to 4 reps in reserve with moderate to high loads. Now, that's 3 to 4 reps for moderate to high loads. And the rule that I like to follow is that the lighter the weight and higher reps you are doing, the closer to failure you need to go. So when you're lifting heavier, you have to kind of take it a little bit easier on yourself, because that heavy weight is very taxing and you don't want to accidentally hurt yourself or cause too much fatigue. Whereas you're safer from that when you are doing a higher rep, lighter weight set. So then you can go 1 to 2 reps to failure. Now, the study also spoke about the significance of overall total training volume, saying that, quote, furthermore, it has been established that the volume of resistance training, defined as the total number of repetitions times sets done together with the loads used for an exercise, is the key element of adaptation in terms of muscle hypertrophy. Moreover, it has been suggested that higher volumes of effort are warranted for maximizing muscle growth response in diverse populations. However, following years of training, it becomes difficult to induce further muscle hypertrophy. Therefore, individuals seek advanced training techniques. So what the study is saying here is that it is very important to know the total volume of work that you are doing, which is defined by adding up your loads, your reps times your sets. It is so important to know the amount of total volume or total work that you are doing, because this is the primary cause of hypertrophy adaptations. And there's what is called a dose-response relationship between the amount of work that you are doing, or the volume that you are doing, and the amount of hypertrophy it causes. And the higher the volume, the more hypertrophy it causes, if you have enough training experience to be able to actually benefit from that dose. Just like with any medicine, your system needs to learn how to utilize it. You need to get used to it. You need to develop a tolerance to it first, all right? And then you can increase the dose, all right? So you need to keep track of the dose, or the volume of work that you are doing, and be doing progressive overload over time. And then what it also says is that in addition to the volume, what is also important is the right amount of effort. And then in order to maximize hypertrophy, you also need to exert a high level of effort. And then what it says lastly is that when you become a very experienced athlete, it becomes more and more difficult to cause the same amount of hypertrophy that you used to cause using these primary methods. So what you need at that point is more advanced training techniques. So that all makes sense, right? Now, the last thing that I want to make note of from this study is that it says, quote, the recent literature shows a much wider range of training options, and that training with low loads in the 30 to 60% of your 1 rep max range results in similar hypertrophy to training with moderate to heavy loads in the 60% plus range when volitional fatigue occurs, end quote. So that is the key there. As long as you're causing the same amount of fatigue, any loading in the 5 to 30 rep range will be just about equally hypertrophic. Maybe not exactly hypertrophic in the same exact way, but you'll see about the same amount of muscle mass gains. So that is your definitive proof that you do not need to lift heavy to make gains. You just need to put forth the right amount of effort and train close to failure in the 6 to 7 plus RPE range, depending on what rep range you are lifting in. And the lighter the load, the closer you go to failure. And also, the more you should be focusing on advanced techniques as well.